Hi everyone, my name is James Avanatakis and I'm the Mild L. Simpson Fulbright Fellow at the University of Wyoming. I'm also an educator here at Western Sydney University in Sydney, Australia. And today I want to talk about trust in politics and why it matters. Let's begin by asking, who do you trust and why do you trust them? Now when I ask that question, most people think about their family or their close friends. And why do we trust them? Obviously because we've actually asked them to do something for us and they've put our interests first ahead of their interests. We've got to know them. We've got to know that we can rely on them with secrets, not letting us down and supporting us when we need support. So trust is something that builds over time. It's something that means that you can basically rely on relationships between you and the people around you. Now, over the last 1 or 2 decades, there's been a lot of discussions about trusting politicians and trust in politics. And what we've seen is that trust in politics has been declining in places like America, but actually all over the world since the 1960s and 1970s. That's 5 decades of declining trusts in levels of politics. And we're going to talk about why this has been happening. And we see this discussion in trust in politics every day when we open the newspapers. Here's a recent article from the New York Times that talks about how not having trust in politics and the political process is undermining our ability to respond to crises facing us around the world. Everything from climate change to dealing with poverty and even responding to the COVID-19 epidemic. Let's look at this chart by Edelman, which looks at the trust barometer, and it shows that governments actually trusted less than corporations, less than media organisations, and less than non-government organisations. So trust is a real problem for governments and politicians all over the world. And this chart is by the Pew Research Center, which shows that trust in American politicians is as low as it's ever been. In fact, it's hit record low levels. So the question is, does it matter? Now, before responding to the question, does it matter? Let's ask the question, well, what is trust? Well, I want you to think about trust from a political and sociological perspective. Anthony Giddens, a very famous British sociologist, argued that trust was something very specific. He said that it's kind of a faith or a belief in an expert system, the way that a system works. We may not understand it, but that we believe that it works in a certain way, and so therefore we build trust around this system. Now for Giddens, this question of trust was what separated modern and pre-modern societies. For example, in pre-modern societies, you grew your own food, you built your own house, you took care of your own transport, you were surrounded by family and friends that you knew personally, and they would protect your security. In modern societies, we actually don't grow our food, or not most of us anyway. We rely on buying it and getting it from Safeway or getting it from other supermarkets and bring it in. And we trust the process that the food is kept fresh, that it's actually handled safely, and it's given to us in a way that we can eat it without getting sick. So this is the expert system that Giddens talks about. Compare that with knowing and growing your own food to actually relying on a system to do that for you. Now let's extend this concept of trust. For example, we trust the mechanic to fix our car. Most of us don't understand how the intricacies of a car work, but we trust the professionalism of the mechanic. We trust the pilot to fly the plane, and actually the engineer to build the plane. Not just planes, but we trust engineers to build bridges that we drive over. We trust experts to build the houses that we live in. We may not understand how to build a house, but we have a trust in this system. And this is the expert system that Giddens talks about. In fact, Giddens points out that we even trust a stranger to act like a stranger. So when we sit on a train or we get on a bus or we fly somewhere, we may sit next to someone we don't know. And what we do is we just treat them like a stranger. We trust a stranger to act like a stranger. The question is, what happens when we no longer trust those around us? What happens when we don't trust the pilot or we don't trust the engineer? Or what happens when we don't trust the mechanic? What do we do? Do we still fly? Maybe not. So for Giddens, if we lose trust, the system begins to fall apart. The question is, what happens if you don't trust the stranger sitting next to you? And that's one of the reasons that terrorism is so effective in undermining democratic societies. So Giddens actually argues in contemporary societies, in modern societies, the opposite of trust is not distrust, it's actually dread. It's this sense that you no longer can live the life that you want to live. You can no longer behave the way you want to behave. You can no longer travel. And as I said, terrorism has a big impact on our lives in this way because we begin to distrust strangers around us and maybe even distrust friends based on something, say, like religious symbols. All of a sudden, we no longer feel safe in the world. We feel a sense of dread and no longer want to operate in the way that we used to. So the question is, how do we apply this to politics? And it's really important that we do apply it to politics. So the way that we apply it to politics is thinking about politicians. Do we believe that they put our interests at heart? Do we believe that they're actually putting the country first? Or do we believe that they're in it for their own good? Do we believe that they represent our interests? That they understand the challenges that we face? Issues around poverty or unemployment or feeling insecure, of security. All these things are really important questions. And if the people that are running the country, if we don't trust them, then it becomes deeply problematic. And there's research to show that increasingly Americans feel that their representatives no longer put the interests of the people or the interests of the nation ahead of their own interests. They also feel that these representatives no longer actually understand the challenges that they face in every day. And so this is what we get when we talk about the Washington bubble. The people are further and further away from our everyday lives and our everyday experiences and our everyday challenges. If you feel that the people that are meant to represent you are not representing you properly or are not putting your interests at heart, then you no longer engage. And I will remind you of a quote by John Adams, one of the founding fathers, that said that democracies actually commit suicide. So that is, the democracies begin to fall apart internally before they actually are attacked from an outside force. And losing trust in the people that are meant to represent us is a step towards that political falling apart of our democracies. So I'll leave it at that. And I'll leave you with two important questions. The first, do you think that trust matters in politics? And if you do, then the second question is, what can we do to rebuild the trust that we seem to be losing with our politicians? What can they do to rebuild the trust of us for them? Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching this, and I hope to see you soon. Bye now.